Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. And today, with the great fortune of the return of Craig Pasta Jardula, who is a media entrepreneur. He runs a number of channels, an excellent talk show, The Convo Couch. And now he runs a YouTube channel, Pasta to Go. He's, of course, a notable election expert. He's observed elections in the United States. He's also observed elections in many parts of the world. So the kind of expertise we're going to need to tap into with the American election coming up. And we might as well start there. And, I wonder, Craig, the conventional wisdom has it Trump will be the GOP nominee, Biden will be the Democratic Party nominee, and then there's the sort of the fly in the ointment, which we could perhaps talk about, and I'd love to know what you think, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is going to be running as a third party candidate, how that's going to be in the mix. So what's your immediate take? First of all, do you accept that the conventional wisdom is correct, and we already know who the two party nominees will be?
I would accept that's who it should be, right? I still think they're going to kind of switch out Biden at the last second. They're trying to wait as long as they can. And I think eventually, and this is just a theory, that you'll see somebody like a Gavin Newsom kind of step into play. He seems to be already laying the groundwork, going over to China and talking to Xi. And, you see a lot of him in the news. He's going to debate Ron DeSantis. So I think that's going to happen.
Harris?
I don't know if there's any.
Would he keep Kamala Harris as vice president? Because that's the only solution without insulting her.
You know what? I think maybe to throw maybe some caution into the wind, maybe they might just move her to a different position. You're needed here, Madam Vice President. I don't know how they will do this, Peter. But to keep her where she's at, that would be quite embarrassing. So my theory is they'll find.
Could I just then follow up? What's the mechanism? How would you remove Biden? I mean, Biden's a cantankerous old man. He doesn't want to go. I mean,
the DNC can do it. The DNC can do it.
I don't think so. I mean,
yes, they can. Yes, they can.
He's the president. Anyway, what do you think, Craig?
I don't think that I don't think Biden knows what time of the day it is right now, to be honest. I think he feels like he's just doing what he's told to be doing. So I think he's going to, with a strong heart and my health condition or something with my son, Hunter, whatever catastrophe they want, they've set the stage for him to exit stage left. They'll have several different types of mechanisms in which they can remove him. And he'll give that speech and he'll somehow step aside. I don't know if, they'll do that to Kamala. That would be quite embarrassing to leave her there. That's why I think they'll find something for her to do as well. I think there's going to be a real big shakeup. And I think you're going to see somebody like a Gavin Newsom step into place and maybe a Pete Buttigieg. This is all just theories. I just don't see how they can leave Biden right now where he's at. He's just a disaster every single step of the way.
Yeah, I suppose, the NATO Secretary General position will be open, so Kamala Harris could apply for that. Maybe they need a new Middle East envoy. Kamala Harris can, I don't know. I don't know. But, we have to remember, in 2016, when Hillary Clinton had her health issues, remember when she fell down, and they had to throw her into the van very unceremoniously. There was talk, would the DNC consider changing the ticket? Because that was the big talk for a couple of news cycles, So it is possible, how much that will, but there's a lot of people that want to see Joe Biden stick around for their own careers, Right. That's the sticking point. And there's no love for Joe Biden.
Well, there is no love for Joe Biden, but what Biden has, his selling point is, hey, I beat Trump once already. I know how to beat Trump. Whereas the others, there's a real question mark. I mean, with Gavin Newsom, in California, does he really have the ability to beat Trump? I mean, that's a real question. So Biden's selling point is, hey, I did it in 2020. People thought I couldn't do it. I did it. Hey, why change the ticket?
Well, George, all I can say to that is that Joe Biden was inaugurated president.
All right,
There you go.
I'm just presenting the argument made by the Democrats. I'm not saying.
Right, yeah, of course, of course.
Well, I think you should also point out that Joe Biden got more votes than anybody in the history of running for president ever, too, as well, George. While we're pointing that out,
exactly. So he was such an immensely popular guy. Yeah.
Tsunami. The man created a tsunami.
Yes, with no coattails.
No coattails.
No coattails.
None.
Let's not forget.
That's right.
We are on YouTube. I don't want to get a strike.
We
so
haven't
please.
said the word, so okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
All right. So your take is that he will be pushed aside at some point. They're going to somehow remove him.
That is my take. He will be pushed aside. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about the GOP?
That's what I'm assuming.
Okay. And what about the GOP? You think Trump will sail to the nomination?
You know, I think he should, really, to tell you the truth. I'm still a little skeptical. I mean, he seems to be winning some court cases that will allow him to be on some of the ballots. I guess that Colorado case, too, as well, kind of kicked the door open. So, you know, I'm assuming that he will be the GOP nomination. And really, to tell you the truth, whether we like it or not, whether you're a Trump fan or not, I think he is the chosen one within this country, which he has the biggest following, you know, by far. And, you know, if we had an election system that was very fair and balanced, I think that would really reflect on him being the president.
It's really interesting. You know, the most loathsome person in the GOP running for president is Nikki Haley. I mean, I just have a visceral hatred for her. I mean, George, remember after the first debate, I even said to you, I don't even want to talk about her. Okay, right. I mean, it's so toxic person. Okay,
right. But it's very interesting. Yeah, go on.
But,
yeah, no, I was just going to add to what you said, that there's an article in the New York Times today about Nikki Haley, and he says how all of the big money is now moving toward Nikki Haley. Not necessarily Republicans, but just people with big bucks. And they want to boost her, not even because they think they're going to vote for the Republicans in the general election, but they think that she can actually beat Trump. I mean, I leave that aside, but that means people like Jamie Dimon and all kinds of equity capital. So they're really pouring a lot of money into her campaign. They've decided that she is the anti-Trump. I mean, they thought it might be DeSantis, but she is the anti-Trump. So it's kind of interesting what this horrible creature that you described. She's getting all the money behind her.
But it also shows how democracy with a small d, I don't have to say that, democracy is really just a charade right now. Okay. Because it's big money that will circumvent the democratic process. That's nothing to be proud of.
Yeah, and I think that Nikki Haley getting the money behind her is more of a reflection on how bad Ron DeSantis has fumbled this whole situation, more than what Trump has done, or her being.
I don't even follow what he does anymore. He's like, he evaporated into the atmosphere for me. I don't pay any attention.
The guy has such a lack of charisma. Did you see when he tried to do the fake smile? I mean, how it was just
right.
It was like hearing nails on a chalkboard.
Right. It's very interesting again how the media, in this case, it was the Fox News media, kind of invented the whole Ron DeSantis phenomenon, that DeSantis is this extraordinarily powerful figure. He is now the de facto leader of the conservative movement. He's going to, and anyone could have seen, the guy has no charisma at all. And he's kind of a little bit unpleasant as well. He's a bit nasty when he's asked awkward questions. And so it came as a shock to Fox News. Hey, people don't really like him all that much. He's not going to do it. And then, of course, Murdoch, decided to back somebody else. You thought, oh well, hey, what about Glenn Youngkin? Maybe we can get Glenn Youngkin to run.
Yeah. Well, I think that shows you also how ignorant the establishment has, both sides of the aisle. If you're thinking, if you're going to pick a Republican candidate right now to go up against Trump, you're going to want to go with the the populist right, who's going to be able to get the butts up there, and then you would back Vivek. But Vivek has always stood a lot, himself aligned with Donald Trump, and I think that's the reason why money hasn't shifted towards him. Had he come out a little bit more against Trump and whatnot, and he was willing to go up against him, but from the get-go, it seemed like he was out there just running to be the vice president. And smart. It was a very smart move, I think.
interesting thing is because Trump has stayed on the sidelines of these debates. The only reason why Vivek gets any kind of traction because he's Trump's stand-in. That's all he is. Okay, he's nothing more than that. I find him to be equally obnoxious. To be honest with you. Okay, he's like the guy that. Remember when you were in grade school, it was always the guy that wanted to answer first and he probably got it right too, but then he'd made a mistake. He patted himself on the back. Right. That's irritating. It really irritates me. How is so self-absorbed.
Right. No, he's
as George and I pointed out during the 2020 election when Trump was, barnstorming, and they did the what's the song? Not Born in the USA. What's the from the what was the song that the YMCA song? Okay, and how they changed. Yes. And then they here's a man in his late 70s dancing badly, and it was amazing. Okay, it was amazing because he's not self-conscious that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it had a certain charm. I mean, it looked ridiculous when he was doing.
Yeah, it did.
YMCA, but it had a certain charm because it just looked so absurd, and he wasn't really pretending to be. He wasn't pretending to be a good dancer or anything.
Or when he would go to the Southern Baptist Church and they're doing the spiritual songs and everyone's clapping and he's trying. At least he's trying. Okay. Okay. And I think everybody around him, well, he's trying at least. Okay. Yeah. He's not. He's authentic that way. Okay. None of these other people are. That's the problem.
But, I do think, though, when we look at something, it's a little bit different. We're inside the echo chamber. So we see Vivek for what he is. I mean, when he does his anti-China, that rhetoric, that anti-China talk, it's just like, oh, my God, this guy is so full of himself. But I don't think the mainstream sees that. I think they see somebody who has very stark differences than Nikki Haley, especially when it comes to the Ukraine situation. And he taps into that appeal that a lot of the populist right likes. Why are we spending money over there? We can't even spend money over here on our border, but we're going to go protect somebody else's border. And meanwhile, Nikki Haley, warmonger extreme, wipe them out. So I do think that the mainstream, sees something completely different than what we see.
So how do you think? How do you think Vivek will do then? Because the polls seem to be a little bit questionable. I mean, he seems to be doing well in some, terribly in the others. I mean, what do you think is going to happen?
I think a lot's going to change when, votes start getting counted. I think he's going to do a lot better than people expect him to do. And, that's going to align him, in the perfect position, I think, to be the vice president. I think that's what he's shooting for, maybe a cabinet position. It would be a far stretch if he got the vice presidency, but I think he'll align himself completely with Trump. He'll get a decent amount of votes there. The question is, will he be pulling votes away from Donald Trump in some areas, being a populist right candidate? So it's going to be very interesting. But I think as we see Donald Trump clearing a path, with these lawsuits and finding a way to get on more ballots, we'll see conversations between the two camps. I surely believe that. I think that's his whole purpose for running whatnot. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and I feel in a way that, the Trump campaign is quite happy that he's been able to go up there on the stage and beat some of these guys up. I really thought Tim Scott was going to do something. So when he dropped out, I was like, oh, God, this guy never got going. What a shame.
Well,
I think
he's kind of like one of those guys. He just wants to be president, and it always runs flat. Okay, it doesn't. What was when Caroline Kennedy? I want to be New York senator. Why? I don't know. I just want to be a senator.
Right.
Or that happened to her. That happened to her uncle. Why do you want to be? What was it, George?
That was Roger Mudd. That was a famous interview in Roger Mudd when he started his campaign. The first thing he did was to go on Roger Mudd, and then Mudd asked him, "Why do you want to be president?" And Kennedy was completely unable to answer. Just rambled terrible, and his campaign never really recovered from that terrible answer.
Pasha, I mean, we've talked about Democrats and Republicans, but and that's how the mainstream media ecosphere wants us to do that. But I don't think people think in those terms. I think that, it's Trump against them, and if he's against them, I'm with him. I really think it's broken down that way, because I really don't like how it's, our politics are always curated by some of the stupidest people you could ever meet. And I think it's not liberal, it's not conservative, because there's a lot of people that nominally wouldn't, think of themselves as conservative, but they like Trump for some reason. And it's more, and Glenn Greenwald is really good at talking about this. It's really just it's the establishment and the anti-establishment. And that's how I think this is how it's percolating down, because I don't want you to misunderstand. I'm not particularly a fan of Trump. Okay. He made a lot of mistakes during his presidency. It really infuriated me. Okay. So I just think that, a prism is forced upon us. And I kind of want to move away from that, because that's what they want you to think.
That's a great point. However, dude, I think there are aspects of conservatism that is tied to the Donald Trump movement, right? There are. It's very
Donald Trump was never a conservative until he got he started running in 2015. No one thought of him as a conservative. He didn't think of himself as a conservative.
Yeah, but I think the landscape in America has changed itself, and what a conservative is today in America probably wouldn't be what a conservative is, 25 years ago, or conservative like yourself. Do you still consider yourself to be a conservative?
That's
right?
Sure.
It's changed, and the whole culture war issue is just, twisted so many things, and people are so concentrated on that on both sides of the aisle. Peter, do you still consider yourself to be a conservative?
Oh, absolutely. But conservatism,
not an American conservative, right?
I think my conservatism would scare a lot of people. Okay. I don't think of Donald Trump as a conservative at all.
But this is where it gets interesting, what you just said, Pastor, because, too many in fact, almost the entirety of the sort of Republican political establishment and the Republican media still kind of think of conservatism as that Ronald Reagan circa 1980. And that's why it always falls flat, because, well, it worked that time, but it hasn't really worked since then. It certainly isn't what conservatism is now in the public mind, the kind of populist economics that Trump espouses. That wasn't anything to do with sort of Ronald Reagan, but they still want to bring back Ronald Reagan in 1980.
Yeah. Because Ronald Reagan is
still the party of Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan is a myth. That's what he is. He's a myth.
Yeah. But how many times do you hear Donald Trump mention Ronald Reagan and the great Ronald Reagan and stuff? It's like, yeah, but I think the politics are quite different of what Ronald Reagan was.
Hillary Clinton used to invoke Ronald Reagan too.
Yeah, right. So,
right.
But I think they're both trying to invoke that populism that Ronald Reagan, once maybe kind of grabbed. So they're all just everybody's trying to grab the populism right now, because I think that's the bigger ticket. That's the more butts in the seats. That's more votes right now.
Yeah, but that goes back to what I said earlier. The attraction to a form of populism is anti-establishmentarian. That's the way I look at it.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's also, that's an interesting idea that Ronald Reagan was a populist, because his policies were not really populist. I remember when Kevin Phillips, very early on in the presidency, he contrasted Ronald Reagan's policies of, on behalf of the moneyed elites, and he contrasted that with Nixon. He said Nixon really was a populist. His policies were for the little guy. Reagan's is not. These were his rich friends who were doing well under Reagan. So it's an interesting idea. Reagan was popular personally. People liked him, but his policies were not really.
That's what they voted on him, the Christian, the actor. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's the same thing that Donald Trump is tapped into, right?
Right.
Well, I don't want to spook you, and I don't want to go into great detail, because George and I have done it many times on our podcast here. Is Richard Nixon was a real conservative, and actually Richard Nixon was a great president. Okay, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now. We could do it another time. But some
would say that Richard Nixon was one of the first globalists, right? I'm saying he made that transition to globalist. So there are
what I'm trying to say.
Nixon did, but.
What I'm trying to say, to be clear, is that his legacy is far more complex than people gave it credit. Okay, his presidency is far more complex than people are willing to give credit to him and the people around him. Because keep in mind, almost everything that's written about Richard Nixon is written by liberals. Okay,
Right. And
Yeah.
no,
And here's something to throw at you gentlemen too as well, since you talk about elections and whatnot. The first election that Richard Nixon won was actually the second election that Richard Nixon won. Just think about that for a second.
right. No, that's exactly right. That's always forgotten that he won the 1960 election, and in fact, that makes Nixon the most successful political candidate ever, because he was on two successful tickets with Eisenhower. 160, 168, 72. No one else has pulled that off. So
exactly. Yeah.
So now, you know, we've done the GOP, we've done the Democrats. What's going to be the impact of Bobby Jr.? Because the polls seem to suggest that he might do quite decently as a third-party candidate. What do you think?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but it was me who went up to New Hampshire with our good friend Don DeBar, and I love Don. I hope he's watching the show today. He's one of my mentors out there, and we were able to catch Mr. Kennedy speaking to the New Hampshire Senate at that particular time, making sure and trying to push for New Hampshire to keep their voting date first and not move it, because they were getting pushed by the DNC. And I happened to catch him in a room when I was able to ask him about the reasons why. And it was just 2 days, less than 2 days fresh of him, putting up a tweet of Roger Waters and taking it down. And I was able to ask him about that tweet and his stance on Israel-Palestine. And boy, that's when, when he answered that question about where he stands on Israel-Palestine, that I opened up a can of you-know-what worms. Shortly after, everybody was doing shows on it. Glenn Greenwald did a show on it, whatnot. The Hill was using this clip, and a bunch of other people were using this particular clip. But I wonder what the impact is going to be right now. As you look at things and you see the polling, it's quite interesting. But there's a lot of people who have just recently, moved away from him since this particular war broke out. And people had asked me, Pasta, you were somewhat supportive of Mr. Kennedy. Now you're not. Why is that?
So was I.
Yeah. Say, this is just ridiculous. And I had said, it's one thing to say, I support Israel. I think they have the right to exist. But after this broke out and he pretty much greenlit the carpet bombing that was coming, it was such a disappointment. And then for him to start talking like Dick Cheney and talking about Venezuela and Iran and all this talk, and then also the, pushing of censorship on campuses by kind of, conflating the issue the way, people like our friends Tulsi Gabbard were once doing, saying this is anti-Semitism. So even though, once again, there have been leftists like myself who have now moved away from Mr. Kennedy, I still think, I looked at him the other day and I still think he's still making moves and making, headways when it comes to the populism, and I think a lot of people, if they look at Donald Trump and they look at Joe Biden and they want a third option and he's on the ballot, they're going to go with it. So I think he's still going to have effect, regardless of, the way he's hurt himself with a lot of voters when it comes to this issue.
Who do you think is going to take votes away from Trump or Biden, if it is Biden?
I had said from the get-go that he's going to take more votes away from Donald Trump, right? He still has the American freedom, the medical freedom movement is the movement he has. A lot of people, there are still a lot of people, I don't know how many, but I still sense there are a decent amount of people who are going to vote on one issue and one issue alone. And that's what they experienced for the last several years in the United States when it came to COVID. And that candidate is Bobby Kennedy. However, I haven't quite got a sense. We're still some time out. We're just about under a year out. So I don't know if that support is going to hold on. And there are areas in which I think he'll take away votes from some of the Democrats. But mainly, I think he's going to take away votes from Donald Trump.
Right.
You know what?
I thought, I'm so sorry, Peter, but I just want to say, I said from the get-go, Bobby Kennedy will take away votes from Donald Trump. And I really did expect a lot more out of Cornel West, and I thought he would take a lot more votes away from Joe Biden. But I don't even know how many ballots he's going to get on now. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's what we do for a living here on the Gaggle. I stopped following Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I stopped. I mean, I found it
Me
so
too.
I was just shocked, and I expected so much more. And it really bothered me that he could be cowed so quickly, so easily. I think, like you just said, Pasta, you can say, Israel's a traditional ally, and Israel has a right to exist. And he could have just left it at that, because that's kind of boilerplate. I mean, it's not a nuanced position. It's not particularly helpful to American foreign policy, but he could have kind of left it at that and talked about other things that people are really interested in.
How do you explain his this extraordinary uber Zionism that he's espousing? Do you have any explanation of why he went to
George? Are you smiling as you asked me that question, knowing that I dip a little bit into the tinfoil hat areas and whatnot, and we can mention him being on Epstein's plane? Is that what you're trying to do to me over here?
Heaven forbid.
That would be one of my only explanations. And just to echo what Peter said, Peter, same thing. I stopped following this guy. I was so intrigued with this guy, and I saw Dennis Kucinich along the campaign trail a lot. We would talk quite often. I mean, this war just broke out. Really, I think it really hurt him and made him lose a lot of votes. But I mean, there are two reasons why I think that he might have this uber Zionist position. The one I just talked about. Perhaps he's compromised. He was, on Epstein's plane. They've discovered this and they talked about that. But another part I think too, as well, is he loves his wife, and Hollywood is run by Zionists, right? So I mean, if he would talk out against the Zionists, then he might be hurting his wife's, opportunities for business in Hollywood. So maybe that has something to do with it. But it is kind of strange. And I'm in this camp too as well. I was so paying attention to this guy. Everything he did, his videos, his little short videos, he was talking about people coming together. He wouldn't take shots at Donald Trump or Joe Biden. He was just in his own lane, and he was just picking up so much momentum.
Did you see the jump in the river video?
Yeah.
That was brilliant. Okay.
Yes, it was great.
My sense, his political calculus is that the position that the United States has vis-a-vis Israel is longstanding. It's kind of baked in, and what's the harm in just going along with that? I can go along with that, so I can say other things. Now, I know that's how politicians think that way, but I think there's a really gross misreading, because I think we've seen over the last month in the Western world, and particularly in the United States, is that this issue with Israel is not settled with a lot of people. Okay. And I think that, like I said, he could have done the boilerplate thing and left it alone and talked about other things. And I think he'd be doing, and I can remember when this all started happening, and Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, they started like, whoa, what's going on here? You could see the genuine sadness. Okay. And it was that first part where, okay, oh, maybe, he's just, finding his way, placating some people, but he's going to move forward. And then it went on steroids. And that's when I thought, oh, the game's up.
Yeah. I mean, he started hanging out with Rabbi Szamuely, this crazy Brooklyn guy, long before the war in Gaza broke out. So this is something deep seated. I mean, all of your explanations, I thought that maybe has something to do with his father. His father was also fervently Zionist. I mean, may well have paid for it with his life, and so maybe it's some kind of a homage to his father.
I don't know about that.
That's too innocent an explanation.
Yeah.
I think you may well be.
Well, I was going to say his uncle, right? His uncle, and everybody says that, but I mean, there are talks that his uncle, actually was the reason why David Ben-Gurion had to resign, because he had told him, how dare you, testing for, doing nuclear weapons testing. There was a series of letters that were eventually intercepted and looked upon, and there's a lot of talks out there, we're getting tinfoil hattie over here, that it was the Mossad who actually whacked JFK, you know what I'm saying? And so the people have, floated that theory right there, that he's just behaving because he wants to stay alive. And, you have this whole thing going on where they won't provide, Secret Service for him. I was at that event in California when somebody was arrested, loaded with, armed to the T, acting like a I think he was trying to play himself off as a I can't remember what position, what group he was playing himself off of, but he tried to do so. He tried to infiltrate.
He tried to pass him
So
off.
I mean,
He tried to pass himself off as some kind of security official, not necessarily the Secret Service, but well, couldn't have been because he doesn't have it. But a private security that was hired by the campaign, which was obviously not true. Kucinich I was really disappointed when Kucinich left, because when he left, I just thought, well, this is done, because Kucinich is a brilliant political strategist. He's really, really good. Okay. Kennedy was so lucky to have him. Okay. And now he has his niece that was former CIA. I mean,
CIA. Yeah. And I heard little whistlings in the wind, Peter, beforehand, that it was, Dennis Kucinich, he's great, but he's outdated. He doesn't understand how these elections are run nowadays. We need somebody who's up to date, more modern tactics, and understand how this works. Or it was just BS that I heard.
Why don't we bring back Mook? What's Mook? What was that guy's name? The Hillary Clinton's
Mook. Yeah, Mook.
Oh, Robbie Mook.
Robbie Mook. Yeah. Oh, we'll figure this out online and blah blah blah.
Don't say his name again. If you say it 3 times out loud, he appears in the mirror. So please,
But what if a conspiracy that we were all led to believe that the whole purpose of the Bobby campaign was to do in Biden, but in reality it was all about doing in Trump. So we kind of thought, oh yeah, he's there, and that he's there to undermine Biden. But that was never really his aim. The aim was always to go after Trump and to do this whole thing. This, he's supposedly on the left, he then switches over, becomes this uber Zionist, and now, pretty much we have to say that, I agree with you. I think he's going to hurt Trump more than he hurt Biden. So do you think there could have been some kind of a conspiracy there from the start, that have Bobby essentially as a stalking horse in order to hurt Trump?
Absolutely. 1,000%. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to prove these theories, but yes, I always thought so. At the end of the day, it's very interesting because a big part of Donald Trump's base is very much, disgusted with what happened during the COVID, the mandates and whatnot. And Bobby represents a lot of that, base there. And there are a lot of people out there who they're going to pull the lever for RFK because of that one issue over Donald Trump. The majority of Donald Trump's base does forgive him for those decisions he made, and not firing Anthony Fauci and Operation Warp Speed. They forgive him. I think he should stop bringing around the Johnson and Johnson family, right? I think he has stopped that, and then but definitely 100%, George. I thought that from the get-go. It's like, he's going to peel away votes eventually. I think the whole running as an independent thing, running as a Democrat first and then going to the independent, was done on purpose so much. Like, look, I tried to run as a Democrat and they still wouldn't let me get on these ballots. They won't have debates. So I have to run as an independent. You see, it almost seemed like everything was planned, and everything that's happening now was planned from the get-go.
Yeah.
So what is Bobby get out of this?
I don't know. If you ask Bobby Kennedy, he still says, he's running to win. And, one of the things I've always talked about from the get-go was I never really thought he had a legitimate chance to win, because I never thought the establishment would let him win, and I thought they would block him from the whole DNC run, from running as a Democrat. And I was just excited about a lot of the conversations we were going to have. What Bobby Kennedy brought to the table was a lot of these other conversations we would normally never have. Just like when he talks about SSRIs, right? And these mass shootings, and kind of tapping into what Big Pharma does, and how America is so drugged up, and that we have to have these conversations about SSRIs and other areas. So I thought that we, the people, would get a lot out of it. But this whole Israel-Palestine situation has thrown a monkey wrench into everything right now, and it's turned everything upside down. In a lot of ways, I'm really proud of a lot of Americans for getting out in the street and protesting against what's going on. But it's really damaged some people out there. People like Bobby Kennedy, people like Tulsi Gabbard. I think they've just gone so far down this Zionist direction where a lot of people are they're not going to listen to them anymore.
When I saw Tulsi Gabbard, basically giving Laura Ingraham a tongue bath, I just thought it almost made me vomit. I mean, it's like Sean Penn sitting with Sean Hannity. I mean, this is just beyond kabuki theater. It's just beyond it. It's just I find it all revolting. It is just way over the top. I mean, and just to be personal with you, I do crosstalk. So Donald Trump becomes president. I lose a lot of guests. Then we have Russiagate. I lose a lot of guests. Then we have Ukraine. I lose a lot of guests. And now this, and people just say, I'm afraid. I can't talk about it. I don't want to lose my job. And I just said, but you used to come and talk about Israel, Palestine all the time with me. And no, I can't talk. I can't. Maybe later. Just the fear out there is so intense.
I think that in the case of Tulsi Gabbard, I think it's similar to I think that like Steve Bannon. I mean, Bannon initially was a little skeptical about America getting these. A non-interventionist. Hey, this is Israel's war.
And we've given him so much money anyway.
Right. Yeah. But now he's turned it around and made this is a civilizational conflict between Islam and Christendom. So he now just simply says Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. This is Al Qaeda. This is Bin Laden. They're all the same. And I think Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, she was really very much opposed to ISIS, Al Qaeda. Thought they were American creations, which they were. And she was pretty much a supporter of Bashar al-Assad. Hey, he's doing a good job fighting these people. So I think that's why she's suddenly taken this position. Hey, these are the Islamists. They're bad guys. Whoever's fighting against the Islamists must be good guys. And I think that's the position on the right.
Yeah, but I think also, George, it's just the fear factor. Is that they don't want to die on this hill. It's not worth it. It's a career destroyer. Okay, you don't take a lump, you get annihilated. Okay, and I think Tulsi Gabbard, who obviously has ambitions, she just I'm not going to die on this hill. And I think go along with it.
Yeah, but she's gone beyond that. I mean, you're right. That's a political calculation, but you don't have to go that far. And I think with her, she just hates these Islamists. I mean, I think they're the enemy, and I think that she just identifies Hamas with Islamists.
Well, she's also conflated what an Islamist is, right? And you can do that right now, and it's not very aloha of her. But I think there was still kind of like this, we don't know exactly where she stands on this whole situation. I think when it came to Steve Bannon, we always understood that deep down inside he's a Zionist, and when this time comes, he's going to pull the trigger. But that's the thing too, as well, Peter and George. When you talk about this whole situation, even myself, I'm in Boca Raton, Florida. I grew up with a lot of Zionists who were mentors of mine growing up. Great people out here. A lot of girls that I went to prom with and dated, their fathers were Zionist and whatnot. So I've always been quiet and not willing and not wanting to talk about it. It wasn't financially advantageous to talk about the situation in Israel, Palestine. But, there comes a time where push comes to shove. I think this has really shined a light on the whole situation. And we've heard, we've seen this, which side are you on almost kind of like mentality. And I think some people have, done what they've done. They've, calculated moves like what Tulsi Gabbard is doing right now and what Robert Kennedy is doing right now. And then some of us, we said, hey, enough is enough. We're going to speak out against it. But we've had to do it very cautiously, very carefully, because we see what's going on. There's a lot of YouTube channels that have received strikes for talking out against Israel and what they are doing. It's just a really crazy, unique situation that's upon us right now. So,
Yeah, well, as George and I have talked about, is that before October 7th, we had so-called conservatives, the fight against cancel culture, the fight against censorship and all that. And then within a day, it flips completely. And
Oh,
even
yeah.
kind of even worse. Okay. I mean, DeSantis, banning certain groups on campuses in Florida and things like that. I mean, what is, what are you about then? Okay. This level of intimidation. And George and I have been following what's been going on in Gaza for a very, very long time. And, we've been aware of Hamas, what it does, what it doesn't do, what it believes and what it doesn't believe. But when I hear Hamas, the first thing I don't think of Islamist group. Okay, I think of resistance group. Okay, so yeah. I mean, again, it's always trying to put labels on things. Like, okay, do you condemn? Okay, well, that is a trap, because if you say yes, I condemn, then it gives the person that demands that you condemn, that gives them free license to do whatever they want as a reaction to that. Okay, so that is a trap. It's a linguistic trick that people put on. I condemn oppression. I condemn the blockade. That's what I condemn 75 years of Zionism. I condemn that, because you have to condemn that, because October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah. And it's crazy too when you look at the whole situation. One of my favorite tweets was like the October 8th. Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com said, well, that coalition with the anti-war right was fun while it lasted, because here it comes. We knew in this situation, you got people like Matt Gaetz out there. Ukraine isn't the 51st state, but the way he talks now in his rhetoric, it sure seems like Israel is the 51st state out there, So it's crazy what's going on. And you're right, Peter, the snowflakes, they're for freedom of speech, but now some of them, oh my Lord, they want to censor people when it comes to their particular issue. It's mind-boggling.
There's also another interesting aspect to it, which is, and you can see it in America and in Europe, that this great support for Israel is now to be found on the kind of the populist right. So this has nothing to do with, Christian evangelicals or anything else, but, you got this guy, Geert Wilders, very, very pro-Israel, Orban, very pro-Israel. I think Marine Le Pen, very much against
to her father.
Very pro-Israel. It's sort of an interesting phenomenon. Why does the populist right identify with Israel? I mean, we can speculate about it, but it is a kind of you have to say that, many people on the American right also have that attitude that Israel in some ways is a kind of Western civilization trying to tame the wilderness, that they're somehow, keeping the light of civilization going. Of course, it's wrong-headed, but I think that there is some kind of a connection between the European and American right and Israel.
Well, it's also, George and Pasta, is that they're just like us. They just in a bad neighborhood, okay? Because we can relate to them. We're like them. They're like us, okay? And of course, the Zionist lobby loves that, okay? That helps them, okay? And George is absolutely right. I mean, I personally, I think it is there's an element of Islamophobia there, because just Arabs, Muslims, they just,
right. But I think that's a part of, in Europe. I mean, they do have a serious immigration problem. I mean, you've seen a riot yesterday in Dublin, because they heard that an Algerian man had stabbed some children. I mean, Europe, it's a big issue in Europe now.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if the people of Europe have connected the dots and realized there was a lot of their wars that they backed, and which led to these destabilization of these countries and why they're coming in there. But I'm so curious to understand, why there is that kind of movement. I can tell you this, judging from my mother, right, who's a big time Trumper, who's kind of picking at Bobby Kennedy herself too as well. She's looking at him. But she's a big time Trumper too as well.
Bobby Curious.
Not Bobby Kennedy, Bobby Curious. But I mean, I made a joke a long time ago, and I couldn't understand when Donald Trump was over there and he started being pro-Israel. There were a lot of people on the populist right who maybe at one time would say, they're the reasons for a lot of the problems in the Middle East, them in Palestine. All of a sudden, well, they're our only ally over there now. We need to, I'm saying, believe it or not, him alone, such a a low-informed voting base when it comes to the Israeli-Palestine situation, the populists right over there, he was able to move a lot of people to go pro-Israel. I made the joke. I said, don't tell me that Donald Trump doesn't bring people together. He's bringing Jews and Jesuits together like never before, and there was something there, I think. And it has a lot to do with the fact that we have a low-informed voting base here, especially when it comes to foreign policy. They don't understand and look at Hamas the way you do, Peter, and the way you explained it, the way George understands it, the way I understand it, because it is a resistance group, It wasn't Hamas that in 1948 they threw into the Gaza Strip. Those were Palestinians. That's why Hamas was born. And people don't understand that. So there is something there. I'm very curious about it myself. I'm still fishing. But, when you have a lot of figureheads that people, they look up to, and they, this sensationalism, they can move a lot of minds in a certain way. And, when people go, sometimes they're stuck going that way.
Well, one of the other problems in this is that you have people with a lot of money in certain, like we've already pointed out, like in Hollywood, in media, you could debate with them about tax cuts. You could debate to them about, about school curricula. But some of these people, many of these people, there's one issue that is important to them, and only one issue that they will not compromise on, and that's Israel. Okay, so you have a lot of people that may be sympathetic because of the way this artificial consensus has been developed over decades. But there's a certain group of people that this is their only issue. Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever. That's their issue. That's where they put their money.
Right, but there's a question here though about when you come to Trump. I mean, Trump 2015, 2016, he went to AIPAC and said, "I don't need your money." And you remember, he was attacked for anti-Semitism. He said by suggesting that AIPAC was buying politicians, which of course they are. Hey, that's an anti-Semitic. And then I thought that, well, he's going to bring a fresh pair of eyes to the Middle East. I mean, he was saying, "I'm going to solve the Israel-Palestine issue. Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing that we'll finally solve this issue?" And then once he was elected, he became fervently Zionist and did things for Israel that no other president had done. But that's because he needed money. But supposing in a Trump second term, he doesn't need that Jewish money anymore. Do you think he might make a switch and go back to Trump circa 2015?
No
way. No beautiful, beautiful Israel, George. He said it the other day.
Well, look, but guys, remember the interagency consensus, okay? It reared its head in a very public way during the ridiculous Ukraine impeachment, but it's working. It's working right now, and any shift in policy in Israel, they'll impeach him again. Okay, they'll just start all over. I mean, they know how to do it. They've had some practice with this guy. Yeah. And he's an anti-Semite. He's an anti-Semite. That's why we have to impeach him. That, unfortunately, that's a very simple slogan that a lot of people would understand. Not understand in an intellectual way, but in kind of a knee-jerk way.
I tend to agree, because who would implement such a policy? Let's say Trump said, I think we need to think anew. You kind of need some people. Who are the people who would implement it? I mean, Nixon had Kissinger. He could, tell Kissinger what to do. Kissinger could implement it. But I don't see how, so even if Trump were to say, I think we need a fresh pair of eyes, I don't know who is there around Trump who would do this.
Well, except for maybe McGregor.
That's somebody who would, but I don't think he would listen. I think he understands too as well. I think when he had those attitudes, when he was a little bit less pro-Israel than he is right now. Let's not forget, this is a president who moved, the embassy into, from Tel Aviv into. I mean, come on.
Don't forget, amazingly, it only can happen in America. Donald Trump gifted the Golan Heights to Israel. Yeah. He gives something that isn't a way that isn't his own. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I've heard Jewish friends of mine in this neck of the woods say he was the most pro-Israel president of all times. I just think in 2015, 2016, when he got off that stage, when he said, "I don't need the money," somebody showed him the story of George Sr. Bush and said, yeah, you should look at history over here, pal. If you're not going to bow down to this lobbyist, they're the most powerful, you're not going to win.
And they
So
didn't,
I think he just got his head straight. I don't think there's any chance of him going back to that 2015, 2016 mindset whatsoever. He's all in when it comes
Yeah.
to
No,
Israel.
that's
And it
right.
looks like most of the candidates are anyways. I mean, do we have anybody other than Cornel West, who's been such a disappointment in his run, his campaign? Oh, my Lord. Even with his new campaign managers, which, you know, I know two of them, two of the four. He's got for the first time ever, I don't know if you heard, gentlemen, we have a 4-pack. 4 guys are going to be the campaign manager and we're going to run it together. You know, I was just wishing and hoping something would get started, and it stalled out completely. But every single presidential candidate out there is pro-Israel, and not just pro-Israel a little bit, pro-Israel to the degree where they won't even call for a ceasefire. I mean, I would love to be in front of Bobby Kennedy right now and ask him, Mr. Kennedy, even after all this time, would you call for a ceasefire today? I'd bet he'd still say no.
No, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that because you'll just be disappointed. Okay, that's it. That's all that would happen there. You know, I live in Russia. I've lived here a long time, and public opinion here is kind of divided. Because there's a lot of Soviet Jews, Russians from the Soviet Union went to Israel. So there is a very lively exchange back and forth between Russia and Israel. And you have this kind of traditional Soviet legacy of aligning with the Arab countries. That's still here as well. So it's a very weird mixture, but nobody is on the extremes. There's no extreme conversation about it here. They're because we remember the Soviet rhetoric. You know, they're colonial settlers. Yeah, most people say, yeah, they are. Okay, yeah, but and the people that would support Israel would say, yeah, and that's a good thing, okay? But it's such a weird thing talking about it here because nobody's on the extreme. No one is, going to put their whole life and reputation on it. So that's the kind of juxtaposition, kind of a normal conversation about things.
Yeah, and here they have people. I believe in Washington the other day for a pro-Israel rally chanting no ceasefire. So they are on the extremes over here. It's mind-boggling. It's scary almost. And when you have these conversations, the way you got to get in there.
We live in a time where we have now pro-war demonstrations. Pro-war.
Yeah. Wow. So scary.
Right. So just going back to the U.S. election, Pasta, I mean, Trump has these hurdles that he has to cross. I mean, he's got 4 criminal prosecutions, all at the moment on the calendar for next year. He has the lawsuit brought by the state of New York to take away his property. What do you think the impact of that is going to be on his campaign?
Well, I mean, it's obviously having this adverse effect, right? Where they think it's going to hurt him, but it's actually just helping him. You know, it's demonizing him in a way, but it's making him look like the hero, like he's taking on the whole system itself, right? Look at Donald Trump. The establishment is going after him. It's actually elevating him in a lot of ways. But when I look at these situations, do I look at any of them really making an impact? And the one I think that could make an impact is the one where he did talk about releasing information where he was caught with the microphone in the room. Oh, this is declassified. And he's speaking about those, that's those terms that are declassified. So I think that's the only one that could really truly hurt him at the end of the day.
Yeah, but that one I think could well be kicked past the election. I think the judge seems skeptical of the timetable of the prosecution. I think she might just be inclined to kick it past November, so he could basically pardon himself. The one I think that might be a problem for me is the DC case, because they can get a conviction, and if they can get a conviction, then we'll see what the impact of that is. But that's one thing that she's going to push for a trial before the election. That judge, that rabidly anti-Trump judge.
Yeah. I mean, we'll have to see. I don't know how these things are going to play out.
Well, I can tell you guys, Tucker had a very interesting, gave a speech recently. It was very interesting. And I tend to agree with him. If these prosecutions keep going, it's going to tear the country apart. I mean, quite literally tear it apart. Because, just like you on Jimmy and elsewhere, we've talked about these prosecutions. And, George and I, if I can speak for George on this, if you can't explain it to me in like 20 seconds, then what's the point? Okay. I mean, none of them make any sense to me at all. Okay. At all. And so it's so frivolous. And coming up with new legal, what do you need a new legal theory? I mean, we have law based on precedent. So, I mean, all of these things are thrown into it. And I think most people, given their very busy lives and keeping up with inflation and all that, when they hear this, this prosecution, it's like, I don't understand it. Change the channel. I don't understand what they're trying to do, except for they're going after him. Okay. And I'm not doing it because I love Donald Trump. What I worry about is that these are so frivolous, that there's so many double standards. There's no due process. I mean, look at the January 6th videos that were released. I mean, oh my God, how many hundreds and hundreds of hours do you have to watch before you see something happen? And I mean that quite literally. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of nothing happening. And there are 40,000 hours of it. It just,
and I was there.
It's so patently
I didn't see one
unfair.
gun. Yeah. Sorry to step over your words, but Peter, I was there and I didn't see one single frigging gun, right? I was at the Capitol on January 6th filming that day, and I didn't see, you're going to tell me a bunch of Second Amendment nut jobs forgot to bring their guns when they're going to go overthrow, the government over there? I mean, it's just ridiculous. It is. And I do think there is something about this whole situation where if it does continue to go on and they still continue to try and do what they're doing to Donald Trump, it is going to crack right now. I get a sense that a lot of conservatives and populists, I don't want to say conservatives, I get a feeling that a lot of people on the populist right, which is the majority of conservatives, unfortunately, today in America, they're not going to take it anymore. They're going to crack right now. They've been very quiet and patient and whatnot, but it could be quite scary if they continue to push these, like you said, frivolous lawsuits whatsoever.
Well,
I mean, they're a joke.
What makes it even more scary is that, unlike what the mainstream media says, these are the poorest, weakest people in America. Okay. And, with all the changes that have gone on, we have these shit libs in every single major power center across the country, up and down. Okay. And remarkably, still half the country is resisting. That's a doctoral dissertation, how people continue to resist when the public sphere is virtually completely monopolized. Okay. And then their standard of living has gone down. Their life expectancy is going down. Their children are not going to do better than they are. Their tax money goes to all these other countries in the world about conflicts that nobody really understands. Okay. And then if a train crashes with chemicals on it in your town, well, good luck to you. Okay. My point is that there's one thing left. It's called the ballot. And if you start screwing around with that, then what else people have? What else? That's it.
Yeah. Wow. And what happened in Lahaina? It's so, I just got back from Lahaina, and what you just talked about East Palestine and seeing what's going on over there. One of the major complaints from a lot of the victims I talked about, the survivors of sorts, is that they are so disgusted that the country gives millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars to Ukraine, but they've offered people in Lahaina $700 a household, you know what I'm saying, for one of the most devastating natural disasters, if you want to call it that, of all time. So you're right. People are disgusted by it. They see it all the time. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen. There's so much uncertainty here in the United States. And when you talk about messing around with the ballot, there's the majority of the country who feel they've already messed around with the ballot in 2020 right now. So, I mean, it's going to explode over here, if this continues the way it does. I don't know. I'm scared for the future to see what's going to happen over here in this next election.
Well,
the same funny business.
Go ahead, George. Go ahead.
Now that raises the question, which is a difficult question, which is the 2024 election and the ballots, because all the problems that we had in 2020 are still in place. We still have the
Absolutely.
mail-in voting. We still have the drop boxes.
Absolutely.
We still
Ballot
have
harvesting.
the ballot harvesting. With all those things in place, it's gonna, you could, and you could well get yourself into a real situation here. We're going into an election where it looks like Trump is on the way to victory. He's leading in all the battleground states, and then lo and behold, he doesn't win. So that
In the
in
still of
itself
the night,
could cause
George.
yes, that could
In the still of the night, right?
yeah,
And
exactly.
I'm glad you pointed
yes.
that out. A lot of people don't know that. What you just said right there is very true. A lot of the COVID protocols of elections have been made permanent in certain states like Nevada and Arizona. And, they haven't changed. Ballot harvesting is still legal in more than half the states in the United States. There's still mass mail out ballots. And, there's that old saying, Americans, a lot of the populists like to put it on Stalin. I don't think that Stalin was the original person who said it, but it's not those who cast the vote who have power. It's those who count the votes that have power. We still have 99% of our ballots are counted by proprietary software here in the United States, which is another scary thing. Where it's cast is not where it's counted. These election systems are crazy. And, going back to that Nixon-Kennedy election, when you talk about dead people voting, right? We still have the possibility and the avenues for that to happen. There is no chain of custody. There is no transparency. We still have all these mechanisms in play. And that's why I'm thinking when we were talking about messing with the ballot, this is something that can come into play. So when we look at Donald Trump and we see what happened in 2020, where the guy was filling stadiums, Joe Biden couldn't fill my living room, and somehow he has more votes than anybody in the history of the running for United States president. I mean, what's for that to not happen again?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Those mechanisms are in play.
It's interesting. We can go kind of full circle. And now I'm going to agree with George, is that why not run Biden? We'll just rerun 2020 with the election. That's it. I mean, because look, I don't know if you guys saw it. I sometimes think, is it really possible to surprise me? Well, it is. Okay, so when they were at that APEC, the Pacific Rim meeting at San Francisco, and Joe Biden just suddenly stood up, walked over to Xi, and you could see Tony blinking like, "What?" Okay, but Biden is doing exactly what they want. He's the perfect president. He does not resist.
Well, how much can you get away with where people, I mean, it's still, I think when you ask the everyday average voter out there, about Joe Biden, they're still scratching their head and saying, how could this have happened? Did this really happen? And it's how far is the ruling class willing to push it, Peter? Before the people go,
it's
no,
like
no,
we're all living their Truman story.
Right, but that's the thing. That's the thing about Biden, and what works for him is that he doesn't arouse the intense hatred that other politicians arouse. I mean, Obama, he had a charisma, but he also aroused a lot of hatred. A lot of people hated Obama. Same with Bill Clinton. Again, Clinton had a certain charisma. He also aroused a lot of hatred. Biden is a kind of bland, nothingy kind of figure. He just trots out, talks meaninglessly, and then disappears. So that's why I think for the Democrats, I think, good. Well, I mean, he doesn't arouse these negative emotions where Gavin Newsom with California and the blow-dried hair and everything else, I think he would arouse intense feelings.
But with all those guys, George, there's a sense of believability. Yeah, Obama can garner up the votes over here. Yeah, Bill can get those votes. Even Gavin Newsom with that beautiful hair, he can get butts out there to go vote for him. You don't have any of that when it comes to Joe Biden. People are still scratching their heads like, who the hell voted for this guy?
But my point is that the Democratic machine, it worked in 2020, and they think that they can pull it off again. Joe Biden is a footnote to all of this, okay? It's a footnote. It's not about him. It's about if they can keep the well-oiled machine operating, okay, and to keep the media on their side. So in a way, I mean, have this kind of a corpse presidency. But that's what they want. They want to be able to have someone that will do that.
But to pull off the same heist twice, and maybe you get away with it one time, because I can tell you this much. I've been around the country right now, and I've done a lot of election integrity, meetings and groups and all these things. And there's a lot of people on the populist right. Election integrity was a progressive issue before 2020.
Sure was.
After 2020, it became a conservative issue. All of a sudden, they were, wait a second, we got screwed over here. What's going on? And they started learning and understanding the system. There's a lot more eyes on it now in every single county, and especially all the counties where a lot of things went, in the still of the night, as we say, changed, where these mathematical impossibilities came in. And I think a lot of people know, and there's going to be a lot more eyes on it. So I think the Democratic machine has to find other areas in which they can maybe make their move. Who knows?
They pulled that stunt off in 2022. I mean, everyone said, well, we've rectified the 2020 problems. And then they did it in 2022. I mean, again, in Arizona.
Berry Lake.
Yeah, you got, they go in and, people who go in-person voting, and they suddenly find, hey, the machines aren't working. Can you wait for 4 or 5 hours before we repair the machines? Oh, no, I don't think I can do it. Oh, sorry. I mean, you can just do these kinds of things. I mean, if they could pull it off in 2022 after what happened in 2020, maybe they can do it again.
But look what's happening now with the all eyes on that Arizona case. And that Arizona case has really shined a light on a lot of things in the courtrooms. People understand when you talk about chain of custody now, it has a lot more meaning today than it did in 2022 and than it did in 2020. So I think the game is still definitely changed. They were able to pull it off in certain areas, but can they pull it off in a general election all over again? That's going to be, it's like robbing the same bank twice. I don't know if it could be done.
Yeah, but when the bank tellers are in on it, it could happen. Okay. What I think is a possibility, early prediction, is that we may not have a clear-cut outcome at all. We could go to days, weeks, months, and not knowing exactly. And that in itself is poison, because then no one will believe the outcome. I mean, and that's where we are. I just find it really amazing being an election observer like yourself. You've gone to countries, developing countries, poor countries, and they can still elect their officials in the same evening. It's amazing. And they use this weird thing. I don't know if you've ever heard about it before, but it's called paper. Okay. And ink. I think I could dig some up here for you, but there's that ink thing and there's that paper thing. And oh, I forgot. Boxes.
Chain of custody.
That's amazing.
Public counting, Peter. Gentlemen, when I went to Honduras and they started doing the public counting in front of us, I started to cry. It's like, I want this in the United States. Instead, they take the ballots, or they take the thumb drives or whatever they have, and they whisk it off to another area. You don't know where, who's driving those ballots or that count, and they take it to another location to count it over there on proprietary software. It's just a joke. And you talk about these drop boxes. Oh my Lord. It is crazy out there. But I'm telling you, gentlemen, I think that if they try, there's going to be some big pushback this time if they try it again. But, once again, I think the ruling class is a little bit smarter than we sometimes give them credit for, and they'll look for other areas. Who knows?
They know how to cling to power. That's the important thing. But Craig, this has been a true delight. Thank you so much for giving us your time. We had a really enjoyable, informative, and insightful conversation. So thank you again. Hope you'll be able to join us again very soon. Thank you.
I would love to have you two gentlemen come on my show and talk about this whole Lahaina situation, especially when it comes to this Minatoya list, where we actually have, idealism at play, conservatism capitalism versus socialism, and how they have this housing problem. I would love for you guys to come on onto my show, Pasta, to go and talk about it. And thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much. We'll absolutely love to do it. All right. So if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.